this session. I know that not everyone makes it to the session itself, but relies on the recording of the session. And I am to congratulate Michael Carlin, who already has started to record. We often forget that little task that we have to do. Thank you so much for coming. And as I indicated, this is a joint effort, and Michael Carlin from Life University and Jennifer Waltos are both here, and they're going to be joining me today, Marilyn Turkovich from the Charter for Compassion. And we're going to do a review of what we did last week, and then new information. We're going to encourage you to use the chat box, and Rebecca, who I saw there she is, also from Life University, was so good last week at responding in the chat box, and I'm guessing she might do that again this week as well. And with encouraging you to use the chat box, and if we have just your phone number, you can actually go over your picture. You'll see a little 3 dots, and you'll be able to name yourself. That would be really helpful so that we have your name. And we are going to actually have a couple opportunities where we're going to have hopefully some exchange, and we might even towards the end of the session break into groups. That will be somewhat of a miracle since we're already hitting close to 100 people being on here. But Michael's really very adept at doing this. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back for those of you who were here last week, and welcome to the new people. We're so glad that we have this medium of Zoom to be able to connect with you guys from around the world during this kind of crazy and weird time that we're all living through. And as a way of providing a couple of just self-care skills that we think might be helpful in dealing with some of the anxiety and stress and that can come from a time like this, but also to help us connect with others from around the world to recognize that we're not in this alone. We are together, and as Marilyn said, hopefully at the end we'll have maybe 5 minutes to even break us down into smaller groups where people can maybe do a little bit of sharing. What we're going to do is at various times we will ask for feedback, and you can raise your hand using the Zoom technology, or you can even just unmute and share something. But we also, again, invite you to share via the chat since we have such a large group. The basic format is going to follow the same kind of format we'll use here on out, which is we'll do a very quick review and do a check-in based on that review. Then we'll do some practice together based on what we have talked about in the previous weeks. And then we'll maybe introduce a new practice. And again, this is going to be unlike a normal compassionate integrity training course. It's going to be very light on the science and on the kind of more didactic forms of the knowledge, and focus more on the practical and practice elements of it. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. I want to share 2 things just as a quick review. The first thing is, let's see, did that share? Looks like
It's trying. You have a mess. There you go.
Okay. Is it sharing my
it's actually
CIT screen?
Yes.
This one. Okay, good. So as long as people can see that, I just wanted to remind people that if you go to compassionateintegrity.org, there's a yellow banner at the top. You can click on that, and it will take you to a website that's dedicated to, or a web page that's dedicated to these sessions, where hopefully you can see that we have recordings of the sessions, and we also have a link here to the practices that we're going to use. Occasionally we'll introduce something that's not in our standard practices, and then we'll just link to it straight from here. So for example, we created a poster of the Help Now strategies that if you go to this page and click on this, you can download that for your own purposes. We are also going to be offering every week a caregivers webinar so that you can join with your children or those that you're caring for if you're in a house doing that. and we will share some of the skills, and Jennifer, our director of training, will be leading those, and we'll have a similar page like this. So without further ado, I'm going to now share the content that we're going to cover for today. And so yeah, so let me just increase my screen here. Sorry for the quick delay. Okay, so as you know, this is based on the CIT course, as we talked about, which is broken into self-cultivation and then relating to others, and then how do we create compassionate systems. Nothing has really brought out the nature of systems more than what we're all experiencing now in the way that everything is interdependent. What we're going to focus on for most of this next 6-7 weeks will be the self-cultivation skills. And today we're going to jump back into some of the skills that we teach for calming body and mind. Wanted to just do a very brief review just for those who are new, but also just to reinforce the content for some of those that are joining. This is the idea of the resilient zone. And in the resilient zone, we can have our ups and downs. We go through our normal day, and what we experience are, we could have times that we're feeling kind of high, we're activated, we're happy, we might even be a little bit irritated, but it's gotten us kind of jacked up a little bit. And then there are times when we're feeling a little bit more down, a little bit more tired, a little bit more maybe lethargic, and even sad. And within that resilient zone, we're going to hopefully experience a full range of emotions. We want everyone to experience a full range of emotions. But when we're in that zone, we're still okay. We feel strong. We feel like we can bounce back. We feel like we're making good decisions for ourselves and others. And then there are times in everyone's life where we get a little triggered, where something can happen, right? We have the situation in the world right now, which I'm sure is a trigger for most of us. So that happens, and then very naturally, our bodies respond with being knocked up high or knocked down low. Or as this graph shows, we could be knocked up high and down low, all from the same trigger. This is all tied to our nervous system. And when we're knocked up high, we start to feel sensations in the body, and we experience things like anxiety, increased heart rate, maybe sweatiness or heat, could be irritability. All of these things happen when we get kind of knocked up high and our nervous system goes into a sympathetic response. We can also be knocked down low. And when we're knocked down low, that's when we kind of descend beneath that lower threshold of going from being sad or maybe a little bit down or tired to being really lethargic, can't get out of bed, maybe depressed. Those are indications that our parasympathetic system has kind of gone into overdrive. Again, these are all totally natural and normal responses to the world we live in. And everybody is going to have a different kind of resilient zone, and everyone will have different kinds of triggers that will throw them up and down, either knocked up high or knocked down low. The key, and what we're trying to do, is help find ways that we can start to notice in our body that we're getting triggered up high or down low, and that we can then intervene with some simple skills to help us regulate our nervous system a little bit. And so what we talked about last week first was, well, how do you know? How do we know what's going on in our body? How do I know if I'm starting to get knocked up high and knocked down low? And that is by reading our bodies, reading our nervous system. And we do that through a technique called tracking. And again, I mentioned last week, but also this week, this is based on a lot of work out of the Trauma Resource Institute and Elaine Miller-Karras, who's a dear friend and partner. And tracking is a way of reading the nervous system where we start to pay attention to the sensations of the body, and we start to identify those sensations as either pleasant, neutral, or unpleasant. And clearly, when we start to notice some of those unpleasant sensations, those are kinds of sensations of distress. And those can give us an indication that we're getting either knocked up high or knocked down low. If we can notice sensations of pleasant sensations or neutral sensations, those are more sensations of well-being that give us an indication that we're doing okay, we're in our resilient zone. And so we begin to look at that, and then what we want to do, again, particularly if we're trying to learn to stay more in our resilient zone, is we want to keep our attention on those pleasant or neutral sensations, those sensations of well-being. again, there are some universals that we could experience, but it really depends on the individual. And so this is one of those practices that we really encourage everyone to be doing, just checking in with your body throughout the day so that you can begin to read your nervous system. Because being jacked up and my adrenaline going may be actually a pleasant sensation for me or within the certain circumstances, but it may be very unpleasant for others and vice versa. Everyone's going to be a little different. So tracking is a skill, and as we talked about last week, tracking is a skill, though, that we pair with other skills. And I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer now, I believe, to talk a little bit about the help now strategies that we talked about, which are some quick strategies that we can use to help us stay in the resilient zone in a difficult time, and also help us learn to use our tracking. Jennifer?
Thanks, Michael. So the help now strategies, as Michael said, sometimes we are just not in our resilient zone, or we are so far out of our resilient zone on one end or the other that we just can't seem to get to a space where we can think clearly, act rationally, act with any kind of logic, forethought, or anything that's going to work for us. So we have on the next page 10 strategies that help us. They're called Help Now. And those are some strategies that we can use. I'm going to walk through them. You can see them all, but I'm going to walk through them, maybe give some examples and how you might be able to track with them. So for example, and I use these on a regular basis. I'm just sharing. I use these on a fairly regular basis. I shared with Michael a couple of weeks ago, I was way far out of my resilient zone. I could not seem to get myself back. And so I used these strategies so that I could get myself back into a space where I could think logically and clearly make these good, rational choices. So they work. They wouldn't be here if they didn't, but everybody has a different strategy that might work for them. So if you, for example, drink a glass of water or juice or a cup of tea, you brew yourself a nice cup of tea, and just the act sometimes of brewing that tea or then drinking it and enjoying it. And if it's a warm beverage, tracking the sensations in the body. What does it feel like when you put that warm beverage in your mouth and as it's going down your throat and into your belly? What do those sensations feel like? If it's a cold beverage, same thing, because you might get different sensations. And you might have a preference for warm versus cold. So knowing that about yourself and being able to track those sensations is really quite helpful, because it takes our brain from where we were and puts it into a different place for us. So that's a really helpful strategy. Another one, close your eyes and then open them, and things around you. In my office, and I close my eyes and I open them, I might see the wall that's in front of me that has nothing on it. And if I turn slightly, I might see some of the pictures that I have up on the wall. So being able to just, if you even just change your position, you close your eyes and you open it, what is it that you see? And focusing on that, focusing on what's catching your attention. If you're outside, that's another great place to be able to practice this skill. And again, what sensations are you noticing in your body as you're doing that? It kind of goes with grounding that we're going to talk about in a little bit later. So here's some foreshadowing. Touching a piece of furniture or touching something around you and noticing the sensations. Is it smooth? Is it rough? Does it feel prickly if you're touching it? Is it really soft? It's a piece of material that on your favorite t-shirt that is so worn, it's so soft that you're like, oh, automatically it just brings you that sense of comfort. So again, tracking the sensations. Noticing the temperature in a room. So if you're somebody who likes chilly weather and your room is really hot, maybe that's something that you're going to pay attention to and you're going to notice, and vice versa. So being able to really track the sensations as you're paying attention to the temperatures around you. I'm sitting underneath my ceiling fan, so I can feel the breeze from the ceiling fan going in my office. Walking and paying attention to the sensations of your body or your feet touching the ground. I try to do this with my children. So take off your shoes, take off your socks, and walk around. What are you experiencing on the floor? So you're walking on the carpet, you're walking on the hardwood, you go downstairs to a different hardwood and there's tile and, in the bathroom. And so being able to really pay attention to those sensations as you're feeling them on your feet, or the different parts of your body. If you're going up the steps, you walk up the stairs and you notice that in your legs. Are you feeling that in your thighs? Are you walking on your tiptoes? Do you feel it in your calves? And really just being able to appreciate all the different sensations that your body is experiencing. Counting backwards from 10, or from 100 or from 1,000, depending on where you are in your or out of your resilience zone. But being able to count backwards, it also takes your brain from one place and puts it into another place. So then once you've gotten to 50, you started at 100, you got to 50, you're like, oh, okay, so I can feel my heart rate has slowed down a little bit. So being able to pay attention to that. Noticing colors around you, or even sounds, noticing there are two different strategies, but noticing colors and noticing sounds at separate times. So I open my eyes and I look outside and I'm like, okay, the grass is starting to turn green, but there's also some dead branches out there. And there's a really cool bird that just flew by my window and it was a robin. And so I can notice the color on the, the breast of the robin. So just being able to pay attention to those. Touching something in nature. So this kind of goes back to touching a piece of furniture and the grounding, but also if you have the ability to be outside and touching something outside, and what are you feeling and what are you noticing and paying attention to out there. And then the last one, pushing your hands against a wall or standing against the wall and leaning backwards. One I like to do, and it's similar to this one, squat down against the wall in a squat position, lean back on it, because then I've got, what am I feeling in my legs? What am I feeling in the back? And then when you stand up, you get a whole different set of sensations. So those are the help now strategies. And just sort of take a look at those. We've got that, they've been up, and Michael will leave them up for another couple of seconds, but think about something that that might work for you, but definitely try them all. If, for example, you find, I hope you don't, but if you find yourself out of your resilience zone, being able to have those different strategies and thinking about what might work for you. And it might be different depending on the circumstances and where you are, if you're high out of your resilience zone or if you're low out of your resilience zone.
Thanks, Jennifer. And I think Marilyn's going to lead us in a little check-in and question and answer for those people who were here last week.
Right. And even if you weren't here last week and you really got into Jennifer's explanations, certainly please feel free to contribute. We do have the possibility for you to be able to raise your hand. It's a little icon when you press on or click on the participant segment on the lower bottom of the Zoom screen, or you can control your mic and open it up. And what we're looking for is some reactions or questions that you might have about these helping tips, but maybe even contribution to other tips that we might share with one another. So let's see if anyone is ready to speak.
I see Marilyn Ish had her hand up.
Marilyn from up there in Port Angeles, Washington.
Yeah. Hi, Marilyn.
Hi, Marilyn.
So I find if I'm overactivated, blowing out until I don't have any breath will bring me down really quickly and get me right into the right zone and activate my normal breathing.
Right. That's really good.
Marcelina, maybe someone can share how they've tried to use these skills in the past week, or again, any questions you have. Marcelina.
Hi, yeah, I wasn't on the call or on the chat last week, but I watched the video, and I had picked up a sweater that I love that's really soft and cozy, and it immediately had this warm feeling like in my chest and in my stomach, and I got that that's what you guys were trying to get us to get, but then when I put it down, I found I had troubles trying to tap into that feeling and hold on to it. And so I'm looking forward to like how
You've
I can
frozen.
sustain that feeling.
Okay. I think we got the message. How
Oh,
can
I'm
she
sorry.
sustain? No, you don't have to be sorry. It's when so many people are on Zoom, not only on this call, but all over the world, we get ourselves into, these frozen moments. But does anyone have tips for how to sustain the feeling that you might get under using one of these help techniques?
One of the things that I kind of used, it goes along with the concept of the 6 colors. is to select out one specific color that maybe I associate with compassion for self. And so every time I see that particular color, in my case it's red, I think of compassion. So that way, regardless of where I'm going, I can remind myself throughout the day. Also, people could potentially get a piece of jewelry or a wristband or something that's the color red in my case and wear that. And that would be potentially a way of continuing the practice throughout the day.
Thanks, John. Mary, you have your hand up.
I was going to say, I love satin. I've loved satin since I was a little child. And I make satin squares, and I didn't realize that that was one of the things that I use to touch and presence myself to. Completely unconscious until in this conversation today.
Yeah.
One of the things we're going to continue to talk about is two things. One is when we get to grounding, we're going to talk about how our bodies are constantly doing things to try to keep us into equilibrium and keep us in that resilient zone. So when we first started doing research on this and learning this, I started to realize, oh my God, all those habits of body that I have that I thought were so distracting or so different, like me touching the tips of my fingers together, are actually my body's way of trying to get itself in the resilient zone. Two key things. One is using tracking at the same time. So the difference is that what I found was once I started doing this, but I started then realizing that it was generating pleasant sensations in my body, then I could focus on those pleasant sensations and I could accelerate the effect it was having on my nervous system. The second thing is, and this is an answer to some of the questions I've seen going in the chat box, but also Marcelina's question, and that is practice. The way that we learn how to hone into our body and the way we can intensify the experience so that it can last a little bit longer is just small incremental practice. Doing this, setting aside 10, 15 minutes a day to try to do this, it will become much more like second nature. So I think the way to do it is just to practice. And again, we have some of those recordings online. I think we have like 3 more hands. Maybe we'll take those and then.
Let's go to Linda, who I think I don't know if you're the caretaker for the little child or the child is taking care of you. So.
Well, you just named it. The child is my caregiver in those days. She's the source, the resource. Hi, we are calling from Israel. Well, I have one nice practice which I use with my kids, and this is stones. Each of them pick up a stone, and the stones have their color, their design, their smoothness, and it actually works after some time as imprint. So it's something makes them bothered, upset, or they feel, not confident or whatever. They just can watch the stone to see the changes of the colors. So there is some kind of change, and you are aware of that change, which is just what's happening around us. It's fine that things are changing. It is the feeling of the stone, is the feeling in your hand, just like touching the furniture, and it is kind of grounding together, all together. So I like this practice as well, and I think it's nice. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Now I know why I have so many stones around.
Maybe 2 more, Marilyn, then we'll
Sure. I see Barbara. Barbara H.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Hello. Just a short addition. What works for me the most, especially when I am in the low area, which I'm currently am, like so many of us perhaps, is being in nature. So to see that the sky is still there, that the sun is shining, that I see little rainbows, perhaps depending on the weather, on little puddles of water. All of this is a reminder for me that nature is still there, despite my temporarily uneasiness or depression or uncertainty. So being in nature and feeling, smelling, touching, experiencing nature is what helps me most to get my resiliency level up again and go from there.
Thank you, Barbara. A lot of people seem to be writing notes here about nature, and we're going to turn now to Andrea, and I think this will be the last one before we continue.
Yes.
Going back to your question and how do you sustain the feelings, what I do is I have a timer that goes off like every hour, and it's just a reminder to take 5 minutes. So I have my formal practice in the morning, at night, but then in between I have all these little breaks that are very helpful, because sometimes I kind of lose track of myself. But if I'm able to kind of go back to being grounded every hour, it has a cumulative effect that is really helpful. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Andrea. People will notice if you have your ability to see that Andrea is also part of the Compassion Integrity training team, and she's from Colombia. And I saw that Merida from Mexico, from Compassionate Cities in Mexico, and CIT is here too. So we asked people last time if they would just write in if they're facilitators, so that people just can make contact with them. Okay, over to you, Michael.
Thank you very much, and good to see you, all of my my family of CIT folks. So yeah, so the thank you for that, and I think what we're going to talk about now is we're going to talk about resourcing, and we're going to not only talk about resourcing, but we're going to ask folks. We're going to have Jennifer actually lead us in a resourcing practice. So before we do that, just as a quick reminder. I mean, while I'm doing this, actually, for those who were able to actually watch the video or participated last week, if you started to work on a resource for yourself, I might ask some of people to share that after I get done with this little section. But if you would, you can also share them in the chat box, because as we talked about last week, resources are contagious. And so one of the things, just so you remind ourselves, the Help Now strategies are kind of these quick, very down and dirty kind of strategies we can use if we're needing something that we can go to in a pinch. The resourcing is a practice that we can develop over time with a little bit more care and a little bit more thought, and can also, to Marcelina's point, can help us maybe intensify some of those sensations that we're going for, those sensations of well-being. So a resource is really any person, place, thing, memory, part of yourself that when you bring it to mind gives you a sense of either safety or strength or resilience or joy or awe, any of these kinds of pleasant kinds of feelings that will generate pleasant sensations in your body. And the idea here is that our autonomic nervous system doesn't understand time. And so if we bring a memory, a strong memory to mind, I saw floating in the chat box somebody talking about smell, for example. So if I don't know about you, but if you've ever walked through a market or something and you catch a whiff of something that maybe reminds you of your childhood, before you know it, you have like sensations flooding your body and memories flooding your mind. And without even having thought about it, it was just that one clue into your autonomic nervous system to release all of those kinds of sensations. So we're trying to do something similar here with resourcing, where as Barbara was talking about nature, you know, maybe there are resources right now that we can't actually go experience. So the idea of a resource is to be able to take something that we either normally do or we've been able to do in the past, or it's a memory or it's a part of ourselves, and to bring it to mind, and over time with practice, bring it to mind with greater and greater intensity, and then to track what's happening in my body in this present moment. So I might bring to mind an image of my son who was on stage in a community theater program 4 years ago. And if I can bring that to mind with such vividness, I then track what's happening in my body right now. And I can tell you just with that little instant thought of that, I can already track that I'm having some pleasant sensations, some tingling down the backs of my legs. So again, we're bringing to mind something that is not something we're doing in this moment, but then tracking sensations that we're feeling in this moment. And so just to finish off this before we turn it over to Jennifer to lead us through it is, it's something that can be real or imagined. It may be a character in a book or a movie or a show that you've watched. It could be a song that you've listened to. It could even just be an imagined place that you want to travel to. It can be internal or external, so a quality within myself or something in the external world. And somebody already mentioned pets in the chat box. I caught that. So it could be a pet, and you can just, again, even if the pet's not with you now, you bring that pet to mind and you make it as vivid as possible, and you notice the sensations. Again, my dog just came to mind and I started feeling pleasant sensations. So this was the instructions from last week of what you do to do this, but what I'm going to do is ask Jennifer if she'll just lead us in a contemplative practice that will help you bring to mind a resource and begin to track those pleasant or neutral sensations.
Okay, thanks, Michael.
Would you like me to do that? Did I throw you a curveball there?
Well, you threw me a curveball. I'm like, okay.
Here,
So
I'll do it.
well, that's fine.
Okay, go.
Am I doing
Sorry.
the activity with somebody or?
No. We're gonna. Oh, I got you. No. We're gonna. Here's. Okay, I'll do it. Sorry, I didn't mean to catch you off guard. So here we go. What I'd like you to do is, you may sit in a chair if you want. If you don't feel comfortable in the chair, you can move around. You can lay down. Whatever is comfortable for you. You may choose to close your eyes, or you don't have to. Again, whatever is comfortable for you in this practice. And what I'd like you to do is, if you've been able to think about this over the last week, bring to mind one of the resources that you've been working with. And if you are just joining us for the first time or haven't had a chance to do this, I'd like you to bring to mind something that you've experienced in the past, a person that you know, a part of yourself, something that as you think of this thing or this person or this activity gives you a sense of strength or courage or resilience or safety. And try to paint a picture in your mind with as much detail as possible, bringing in all of your senses if it's appropriate for that resource. As this resource is becoming vivid in your mind, track any pleasant or neutral sensations that are arising on the inside in your body. If you can identify a pleasant or neutral sensation, just rest your attention with one of those. You can now continue to bring that resource to mind, continue to vivify it, thinking about the details, and then again, track the sensations in your body. And that will conclude the practice. So in a typical CIT course, for those who have taken it, you'll know this. When we do this, we tend to, you can do this with a partner, and you can ask them about their resource, and they can describe their resource, and that can even make it more intense. So that's something we invite you to do. And I think that's what Jennifer was expecting me to have her do. So I apologize for that. We're improvising a little bit given this new world we're living in. We have a couple minutes. I don't know if anyone would like to either share a resource or that they're working with, or ask questions, maybe for a few minutes, so we can make sure that people understand what this is all about.
Hey, Michael, I'll share.
Okay, Rebecca.
Maybe it's important that I share this. I used a resource that I use a lot that always has a little tinge of sadness with it because it's just from a place in time that I don't have access to anymore. So while I was initially I couldn't believe the smile on my face, and it's kayaking at a lake, at a place that I just don't really have access to anymore. But it's always, I love this about the resilient zone because it's the okay zone, as Elaine says. So we can feel sad and happy in all kinds of ways in our resilient zone. So I had to ground a little bit while I was doing it as the sadness started to bump me out of it. But then, I felt that little prickle of tears, and even just tracking the tears became sort of part of the resource. So even though it kind of had a larger amplitude to that wave than I think I was expecting, it was really good to have that other skill at my disposal to bring it back in. So I thought I'd share the experiential learning that I had in that moment.
Thank you, Rebecca. And that's really an important thing to share. And I think I caught a comment in the chat too about this, is that resources can, first of all, they're not all happy thoughts, right? They can be things that are deeply meaningful to us in ways that are not just about bringing joy. And resources can be used to knock us, bring us up from a low zone, and can also be used to bring us down from a high zone. So different resources will work in different ways, but resources can also split, is kind of what you were getting at. And you've got a lot of experience with this, so you were able to keep yourself grounded through that process. But when we talk about a resource splitting, is that a resource could be something that both brings that sense of safety and joy, or whatever it is for you. It can also, though split, it might be something that also generates some unpleasant sensations. And so there's two things we can do with that. One is continue to focus on the pleasant and shifting our attention, because rarely in our body are we just experiencing one type of sensation. There's usually a pleasant or neutral sensation that we can shift to. But if it continues to be a resource that's not working and it's generating unpleasant sensation, change the resource, right? You can always move to a different resource and save that for another time. So thank you for that, Rebecca. Janie?
Michael, we have Janie.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
My go-to resource is a place in Alabama from my youth, and I realized that always calms me down and makes me peaceful and brings me out of the high zone. But I realized I needed something to uplift me, so I got a song that means a lot to me, and I wrote down the words, so I'm learning the words, and I'm singing it to myself, and it actually gives me goose flesh and makes my heart sing.
I love it. That's great. And that's a great example of how two totally different kinds of resources for two different kinds of places where we might find ourselves. Thank you, Janie. Maybe we have time for one more person to share a resource. I think Renee.
Renee.
Hi, Renee. Good to see you.
Nice to see you. I just wanted to add on to what Janie was saying. I'm a nature freak, and so during these times, I'm also aware that many of my friends around the world are in places that they're no longer allowed to be outside directly. And so I've been also working on resources for myself that, while I love nature and all those pieces that are, it's a resource that's about people. So what I put in the chat is I used to sing in a multicultural, but you know, a spirituals choir in Denver, Colorado. And before every performance, we would find a place in the back, all hold hands. And we had a particular song that we sang before every performance. It makes me feel emotional to think about it. But we were physically touching and singing. And then during that period of time, the research also came out that choirs, their hearts synchronize while they're singing together. So it was all these sensory levels and then also singing. And so I found that it's a really great resource for me to reflect on at a time when, you know, if I weren't able to go outside and have direct nature, that's a really human one. And I'm alone, so I've been alone for a couple weeks. And so thank you for listening, but that's one that's kind of a new resource for me that I just wanted to share.
Thank you, Renee. Okay, so we'll you know, keep questions coming, and you can also, you know, reach us at info@compassionateintegrity.org. And I know Marilyn had shared, I think her email is a part of the notifications that everyone gets. So continue to ask questions on these practices. So far we've covered tracking as a practice used in conjunction with either the Help Now strategies or resourcing. And now we want to give you one last strategy for this week. And this is one that many of you have already kind of foreshadowed in some of your comments. So Marilyn,
Right.
I'll shift the
This
slide
certainly,
too.
yeah, this has been mentioned already, and that is grounding. And as you look at this individual and see how their feet go into a root system, a very deep, thick root system in the ground. And basically, grounding is like building natural resiliency. It helps us to direct our thoughts, and from, you know, times that are trying or situations that might be distressing, grounding really helps pull us back to the present. And one way of dealing with it almost immediately is to, you know, think about ourselves, our body, and find a neutral or even a pleasant feeling somewhere in our body. That's one very quick technique. It's certainly a time, grounding, to practice when you're feeling very anxious, and you might even feel out of sorts or even out of your body. And you know, it's good to practice a resource before you get to grounding. And Rebecca was referring to that in her explanation of her event that she was talking about. Grounding is practice neutrality. It's, you know, it just happens. Like, for example, I have a compassion bracelet from that's in English, and I have compasión in Spanish, and I find myself turning them. In fact, you can't see this, but there's no more color left on one of them. And the idea is to be able to turn them to remind you to do another good deed. I don't do so well at turning them as much as just playing with them. But, you know, you oftentimes will see people just naturally taking a chain that they have around their neck, grabbing hold of it and moving it, or running their fingers around it. I was going to give an example, but I'm not going to name the person. But some people will cross their arms, and they'll just do that. And I guess, you know, for people who are familiar, I am going to name him. But the president of the U.S., you will oftentimes find him after he's spoken that he is crossing his arms. But some of us find ourselves sitting in a particular way. It's so funny because I never knew this, but I would have, when I was at Columbia, I would have a meeting a couple times a month with the dean, and I would naturally find myself using my hands, but putting them under my legs as I sat. And that was my way of grounding. And she mentioned it to me several times, are you ill? Is there something wrong? And I was very surprised. And she says, why are your hands like that? Are you stopping yourself from leaving? And I said, no, I'm just feeling comfort, you know? So, you know, we all, if you, like last week, many of you have written and said, you know, I thought about this a lot, some of the things that we did. And I think the same thing will happen this week when you just kind of take stock of some of the things that you do. And basically what you're doing is you're really expanding your expertise on how to regulate your nervous system with grounding. So I'm sure that we have examples, but I'm not sure, Michael, if we wanted to break people into groups.
Well, two things. One, we're gonna go ahead and do a practice now. We'll do a grounding practice. I've also noticed that the breakout group functionality is not available. So I don't know if that's because of the way we set this up or not, but we can work on that between now and next week. So we'll be more on that later, but that won't happen until next week, unfortunately.
Okay.
But what we do have is a practice for you, and I'll go ahead and stop the share at this point so that everyone can maybe see each other a little bit better. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, just like Marilyn was saying, is that our bodies are constantly doing this kind of work for ourselves. And some of the times we maybe have been critical. I know I've been critical of myself before about certain postures I might take or ways of standing and things like that. And actually, I've realized that this is my body trying to feel safe. It's my body trying to regulate itself, and that's really okay. So what we're going to do with this is just begin to learn how the body can shift into different positions to make ourselves return to that resilient zone. And so I'm going to lead you through a practice. If you would like to get up and move around, just make sure your speakers are on in such a way you're not wearing a headset. You can actually hear my instructions. But if not, here's what we're going to do. And again, there's a guided practice recording on the website for this. I'm going to ask you just to find a position that your body would feel comfortable in right now, where you feel like you have a sense of solidity, a sense of groundedness, a sense of safety. And feel free to shift around as we're doing this to explore various different positions. So don't feel like you need to get into a position and then stay there. And so I'll give you a second just to shift around. Again, you can close your eyes if you want. You don't have to close your eyes. It's really totally up to you. And what I'd like you to do is, as you find a position, bring your awareness to a place in your body that's making contact with another physical object. And that could be the contact your feet are making with the floor. It could be the contact that your legs are making with either the floor or a chair. Your back may be making contact with a wall or the back of your chair. You could also be making contact with yourself or with an object that's not fixed to the floor, something like Marilyn was talking about, her bracelet. It could be that your arm is touching your other arm or your hand is touching your chest. So just bring your awareness to a place in the body that's making that contact. And as you do so, track any pleasant or neutral sensations that arise in your body. Feel free to shift if you'd like to explore a different posture. And then again, when you do so, just return your attention to a place where you're making contact with an object, and then track those pleasant or neutral sensations. as your mind wanders, which I'm sure it will, just every once in a while you'll catch yourself, and then just return your attention to a place in the body making contact with another object, and track those sensations that are pleasant or neutral. And we'll conclude the practice there. So I'd love to get some feedback and some questions or some shares from people. Before I do that though, just as you're kind of coming back into your space, is to think about a couple things. One is that grounding is something that, like resourcing, can be done anywhere. And so if you're sitting here like I am in front of a camera and I'm talking to you, as I'm talking to you, I can bring awareness to where my legs are making contact with the chair or where my feet are making contact with the floor. And I can actually multitask in that way, right? I can track that. I can notice the pleasant or neutral sensations and still be talking to you and still be engaged with you. If, as I'm doing this, I might notice that I'm getting to the top of my resilient zone or the bottom of my resilient zone. So it's a practice that we can do in daily life with practice. And the key is again, returning to the tracking. Is that it's one thing to find a good posture that I find that gives me strength, but it's another thing to do that and then track what's going on in my body and really direct my attention to those pleasant or neutral sensations. So maybe one or two or three questions or feedback. How was that for people? Was it, did it make sense? Linda. Linda, did you want to share? I don't know if I don't see you on my screen.
Yeah, hi, hello.
Hi.
Well, we had a question before when you were talking about those body positions or feeling your own body or positions that we are used to do when we are, let's say, you named it as being grounded naturally. But my question was if it doesn't just show that you feel uncomfortable, you know, like if it can help or if it's a sign that you are anxious, nervous, because sometimes you can see people touching their hair, touching their neck, and you just realize they probably don't feel comfortable. So that was the question.
Yeah, so the answer to the question is yes, it is showing both, right? So when my body, like, so say for example, I'm getting ready to, you see people who give talks a lot, right? They're pacing or they're grabbing the lectern like this, right? It's both a sign that their autonomic nervous system is kind of overactive, but it's also a sign that unconsciously their bodies are trying to do something with that. So like if you're in a sympathetic response, you're generating adrenaline and cortisol and things that are producing excess energy. So the pacing is a way for the body to dissipate that energy. Now, two things from that. One is, as a tracking mechanism, I can notice that and say, oh, I might not have been aware of the fact that I'm getting to the top of my resilient zone. And one of the most beautiful things of tracking is it gives us an early warning sign. I might have been pacing around my house and then my wife comes in and asks me to do something and then I go out of my resilient zone and I blow up at her. Well, if I was pacing around my house and was doing some tracking, I might have realized, oh, I'm probably right at the top of my resilient zone. Maybe I could do tracking, I can do grounding, resourcing, or help now to get myself regulated a little bit better so I don't respond that way to somebody who walks into the room. So it's both of those things. It helps give me a signal. And however, as I'm pacing, say, for example, even in that pacing, if I bring my attention to my body and what it's doing, and I start to shift to see if there's any pleasant or neutral sensations, I might realize that there are actually. So like I mentioned, I get up on stage and I'll talk like this. Now I bring my attention there and it helps me. If it was something like where maybe I was like, shaking, I might think, oh, that's unpleasant. So now what I can do is I can shift and I realize, oh, wait, maybe the bottoms of my feet standing on stage are more grounding and more pleasant, and I'm going to shift it away from the shaking. So it's all of these are skills that we like to say are about reading your own nervous system, reading your own experience, and figuring out what works for you. We're not here to say, you know, do this because it's going to work for everybody. It's all based on your own experience.
Thank you.
Michael, we have Renee is acting as an advocate for somebody she sees raising her hand.
Oh, thank you.
And we haven't noticed. Roberta Claire.
Hi, Roberta. I just unmuted you.
I wanted to say that I found it calming, and I will practice a few of these. Hopefully, a few every day or a couple every day, and change them. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And one thing I want to encourage people to think about is how you can, particularly these practices, are things that you can insert into your day 1 or 2 minutes at a time. You're washing the dishes. You can bring your attention to your body and figure out where you're grounding. You can bring to mind a resource while you're washing those dishes. Whatever it is you're doing, inserting them. It's not, even though, well, starting next week, we're going to get into practices about that deal with the breath. And I saw some comments in the chat box about that. So we'll reinforce those next week. But instead of saying, okay, I need to go sit now for 15 minutes and just focus on this practice, a lot of these are practices that you can just insert into your day. One last thing, and then I'm going to get to Ken, is, and to Roberta's point, is that I want to also think about the agency we have. We have the capacity to do these practices. I have the capacity right now in front of you to choose to bring my attention to my body and to sense a little bit, maybe if just a little bit more calm. And I think that's a resource in and of itself. It's an empowering thought for me to think about our ability to do that. Ken, I think you'll have the last word if you still want to raise your hand. I see you took it down.
I took it down.
Oh, you took it down. Ken, would you like to share? Ken, you might need to unmute. Okay, well, Ken, we might have to wait for you till next week. So I do think that brings us to a close. I hope people will visit the website, download the resources that are there, continue to practice. We'll work between this week and next week on figuring out the breakout groups. Ideally, we'd love to let you go into small groups of 10 or so and have some time to talk to each other and connect. That's not happening this week, but next week we will reinforce these practices, practice together, and then move into some of the more traditional mindfulness practices that we do with Skill 2 in our program.
And if you want to download the chat, on the very bottom right-hand side, you'll see 3 dots, and you'll be able to save the chat. And then you'll have, like, I haven't been able to read all of them, but you'll have an opportunity to see people's reactions. But also, I think there are a number of websites that have been posted. Thank you all for coming.
And don't forget, we have just one last thing. Sorry, Marilyn. On Fridays, for people in Asia, India, that time zone, Europe, Shane O'Connor and Anya will be leading us in a similar session as today. So spread the word for that. And then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we have at the same times, we have a caregiver group / parenting group that Jennifer is leading with some other colleagues to bring some of these skills to parents who are at home now with young children and can use those as a way of how to use these skills with young people that we're doing with the C-Learning program as well as CIT and the Charter. Have a wonderful, wonderful week, everyone. Please stay healthy and stay safe.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.